And we live by those. We have some standards. So that means that if not every teacher, every parent, every family is coming in there fully on board with our values, we know it's going to take time, but we're going to have some discussions, some difficult conversations, and we're going to present ways to heal and ways to help people heal. So I think all that is really, really critical to this. And if we go back into the 70s and the 60s, 1960s and 70s, we started to work on multicultural things. What can we do to help people understand the values that people bring from other traditions?
Because of racism, because of systemic injustice. And if we don't do something about it, if I don't do something about it, then I'm a part of the problem, because my whole focus was academics, outcome, learning goals, everything that Dr. Mason mentioned. I was Mrs. Henry Ford. Like, we got to get them to learn. But there's something there that needs to be addressed before we can get to that.
Welcome everybody. This podcast is all about you. Why knowledge matters. Welcome. I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Dr. Mason and Dr. O to talk about their book, co-authored with other two colleagues, with Randy Ross and Jillaine Flanders, about Little Learners Big Hearts, published by Solution Trees. Welcome, and I'm really thrilled to have you both here on the show.
And thank you. We love talking about this. We think it's just such critical work, and it just extends our philosophy so far. And to think about the youngest children, early childhood, what can we do when kids are very young? You know, a lot of times that area is overlooked.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then we think we've got it handled. But, you know, so much happens between the ages of 0 and 5. It's a very critical developmental time. And there's so much that can be done with schools, with teachers, with the interactions teachers have with children, and the interactions children have with each other during that time. So what we hope to do is to bring some heart to the matter.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I was going to say thank you so much for having us. And I just want to echo what Dr. Mason has said. This work is so important and it's so crucial. And oftentimes in many conversations surrounding education, early childhood is left out, not just conversations of equity and inclusion, but conversations of STEM and academics and math and reading. A lot of times these conversations start with middle school and high school. And a lot of times our early childhood workers get overlooked. And so we're just really excited to shed light on this research and how starting early is really the key to becoming a more pro-human society, because our research spans beyond the world of education. It starts in education, but when implemented with fidelity, it will make ripples into the entire community, into our entire world. So I'm excited to talk to you about this today, and I'm excited, and thank you for having both of us here, and our other coworkers, Randy and Jill. Thank you so much.
If I could just add at this point too, you know, Orinthia and I have been working together since 2014. Okay, our work started with preschools and early childhood in Washington, D.C., in poverty zones, in zones that were largely African American and Latino students. And what we said is we need to bring STEM and those wonderful experiences with science and technology, engineering and math and art, STEAM, to early childhood centers. And it's so nice to see that our work has evolved over the years. And here we are, you know, what is it, 2024, 10 years, a decade later.
Yeah.
And talking about the important concept of race relations and what we can do to further harmony and well-being among all people.
It's good.
We
It's
can
so
keep talking or you
refreshing.
can ask us questions. Either way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is what is so important, and that's why I want to thank you for your courage, both of you, because race is so politicized right now, and it's almost like you can't even talk. If you are a black person, you can't talk about white person, and when you're a white person, you can't about So therefore, I find it so vital, and your approach is really solution oriented. It's empowering. Across races, ethnicities, and so on, right? And you start really at the very, very beginning, which is, middle kindergarten and really elementary is so crucial. Now, before we start,
Yeah.
let's give us a view of who you are. Who is Dr. Mason and Dr. O?
Well, I'm an educational psychologist. I've worked for a long time, first in the area of special education years ago. And at that time, I really focused a lot on early childhood. Then I kind of moved on and worked at the national scene with research, again, in special education, but then moving to leadership. And because I really realized that what we do at the school level with principals, assistant principals, with informal leaders is so critical. They really are the captains of the ship. So I wanted to make sure that we had some experiences there. So I worked with the National Association of Elementary School Principals. I directed research and professional development for them for a few years. And I've had my own business, the Center for Educational Improvement. We formed that in 2009. Just this last year, I transitioned from being executive director. I'm now the founder and senior scholar, which supposedly means I'm going to have a little more time to do other things. That has not yet come, but I think it's on its way. But along the way, I worked with Yale University. We've had some grants in the area of mental health, including the current Compassionate School Leadership Academy. Orinthia is part of that academy as well. And that is, again, to build compassionate school leadership. And that really does speak to the mission of the center and what we've been doing. And then on top of that, I'm a yoga mindfulness meditation teacher, certified in 2001. And you'll see the threads of yoga and mindfulness and the meditation and the philosophy behind it that are just threaded throughout what we do. Orinthia.
Awesome. Well, I'm Dr. O. So I am the founder and executive director of STEMearly LLC, which is where we provide STEM programming in the areas of early childhood. Before I started STEMearly in 2020, I've taught pretty much every early childhood grade from fifth grade all the way down to preschool. I taught for over 20 years in the Maryland and Washington, D.C. areas. I just have a passion for educators. I have a passion for teachers. And, my mission is to reignite the passion to teach and also give teachers the tools to thrive. And the reason why I say reignite is because I think a lot of educators come into the field with passion and excitement and they're ready to go. And then when they get into the thick of it, a lot of times their passion is kind of snuffed out a little bit because of all the politicization and all the politics and things like that. And Yannick, you mentioned it, especially when it comes to race and how it can be polarizing and divisive. And all of these things kind of take the joy out of teaching and the joy that once brought us into the world of education. So I'm really passionate about that. And that's kind of what drew me to Dr. Mason back in 2014. I actually applied to be her intern and she said, no, we can do things together. And when I heard her work about heart beaming and teaching from heart and starting with mindfulness, that was fairly new. It's really popular now, but when she started, it was a fairly new concept. And I was like, I really like this, implementing all that into our teaching practices. And so that's kind of why we partnered together. And, we're still out here doing this work. It has evolved to be more vocal about race because it's so important to talk about these things early. and how we can talk about it in a way that is not divisive, that is not hurting people's feelings, that's not all these things that the media keeps saying that they are, but it's really about becoming compassionate, pro-human people, which has a lot to do with being grounded and being mindful. And that's why you see a lot of those threads weaved in there. So I'm excited about the work and I'm just passionate about it. And you may hear it come through in my voice because I do get a little passionate, but I'm really passionate about educators and just want to use my research to help them and give them practical tools that they can use, that they can say, okay, I can actually do this in my classroom or in my life tomorrow. That's my passion.
You're the heart of the matter. So let's deep a little bit into the topic. And there is an acronym, and please unpack this, what you mean by the heart of the matter. Really, just start, whoever wants to start. It's just such a nice synergy that you both have. And this is truly what we need, right? You have truly this ability to instill this excitement and hunger of learning, right? And so I'm really blessed to have you both here. So let's go to the heart of the matter.
All right, so I'll get started. Again, when I met Dr. Mason and we started doing our research, she had this philosophy of heart beaming and starting with heart. So, not starting with curriculum, not starting with outcomes, not starting with those things, but starting with heart. And the more I looked into what the heart of the matter was, I started to think like, oh, this is actually practical. A lot of times people think it's not a practical thing. It's kind of like out there, but it's really not. It's very practical. And so I came up with this acronym to kind of bring the heart of the matter into a tangible thing that teachers can do every day to become pro-human, anti-racist, compassionate, equitable, all those things. And the heart of the matter, it goes HEART and then there's a plus. So the H is hope. You got to begin with hope because becoming a pro-human, anti-racist educator is a matter of hope because there's so much division in the world. And when you come to a topic such as race, if you don't enter it with the sense of hope, you can be defeated before you even start. So we start with hope to say, I may not be able to cure racism in my lifetime, but I can start and make every family, every child, every family, every coworker that I encounter, I can make them feel like they belong. Because acceptance is not agreement, and I don't have to agree with you, vote like you, look like you, worship like you to make you feel like you belong. And that takes hope. Right. And then there's the E, which is education. And when we were looking at education, it's really about self education. It's really about taking on yourself to learn about your families, your students, your community, your culture. What are the things that we're dealing with in our specific school? What are the families that are coming to me? What are they dealing with? Am I teaching students from indigenous communities? What are their needs? Because everybody's needs is not the same, right? And so as educators, it's our responsibility to self-educate, learn about our students and families, right? And then the A is so important. It's acknowledge, right? You cannot abolish what you will not acknowledge, but you can acknowledge what you don't know. So now that you know, because you've had the education, now let's acknowledge, you know what? These families are really dealing with some hard stuff. Racism is real. Systemic racism is real. Bias is real. Implicit bias is real. I have implicit bias. We all have it. Acknowledge it because you can't we can't address what we refuse to acknowledge. And I think especially in our country, it almost seems unpatriotic to acknowledge our racist history, but it's really not. It's just saying we understand that this happened and we want to do something about it. And once you acknowledge it, you make that resolution, which is the R. I resolve to do something. And what the cool thing about our book is we give you what to do. So you're like, okay, I want to do something. I make a resolution to do something, but we give you practical steps all the way down to STEM activities that you can do in your classroom that would foster compassion and pro-humanity. We give you books. Jill has done a fabulous job of giving you books that you can use with your early childhood students, books that are easy books that are like, okay, they're kind of like, this is to ease into the conversation. And then books that are like, okay, we're going to dive into this feet first. And it may be a little uncomfortable. We're going to do this. So in the resolution, and then the T is the teaching. That is me actually implementing these strategies that I learned. And we added the plus because we want you to understand that although this is an acronym, HEART, the plus is it has to fit for your community, for your classroom, for your students. So it's really practical things that you can do to become empathetic and compassionate. And it's a tool, and it's a really good tool. And we break the tool down throughout the entire book. So that is the heart of the matter. And we start always with hope, and we leave you with, what does this have to do with my school, my community? Because everybody's community and everybody's school community is very different. And this acronym can be catered to fit your local context. So that's it.
I'm going to add a couple. Explain really the heart of the matter, the heart of the book, and where we're going. When I came up with the idea of heart, it was back, the camera back a few years, 2009, 2000. And at that point, we couldn't be doing yoga in schools, even though just no way. And mindfulness was just beginning. But I spent a lot of time in India. And that was part of what I did as my passion, actually, for meditation, for understanding more about myself. And actually, I have a book here. One of the very few I've kept from like 2000 and about 1980, excuse me. And it's a book from Mahatma Gandhi, and it's just a book of sayings. And, you know, I will have to say, everyone I consider to be a role model or mentor, most of them have done something that is so atrocious that I think, oh my God, can I really still hold them up near and dear to my heart? Nonetheless, Gandhi has some really wonderful things to say. And one of the things he says in his daily posts has to do with the idea of you can't start outside of yourself. To reach the truth, we start with ourselves. And I think that's really foundational for our work, to start with yourself. My work has also been influenced by other Indian philosophers, from some of the gurus in the Sikh tradition in northern India and others. And a lot of what they do is they focus on healing and well-being. Those things are threaded throughout our work. We really say in many of the books we've written that, in fact, we need to focus on healing. And we use that word intentionally because we acknowledge that there's been harm done and something else is needed. And it's going to take effort. Intentionality is important. And we can be part of the process. We can help people heal the internal part, as well as being the supporting wedge to uplift others, which is part of the mission of the center. So think about uplifting yourself and others. What can we do? How can we be responsible for ourselves, but be part of a community? And a lot of what we do is really community-based, okay? You don't do it alone. You do it with a group of people, a group of educators, your students, your families. You acknowledge where people have come from, with their backgrounds, their differences. We celebrate differences. You know, it's not being colorblind, right? We celebrate differences and we recognize what we have in common as well. In the book, we talk about bringing families together, right? And say we have different races, different families, different backgrounds. Not everyone's going to be at the same place. And what we have to do is kind of work through our differences, acknowledge them, but be firm as educators. Like, this is what our standards are. We kind of have these expectations. And we live by those. We have some standards. So that means that if not every teacher, every parent, every family is coming in there fully on board with our values, we know it's going to take time, but we're going to have some discussions, some difficult conversations. And we're going to present ways to heal and ways to help people heal. So I think all that is really, really critical to this. And if we go back into the 70s and the 60s, 1960s and 70s, we started to work on multicultural things. What can we do to help people understand the values that people bring from other traditions? But you know what? We recognize that alone did not work. Anti-bias alone did not work. It came probably too much from the head. What we need is something that speaks out in a forthright manner and says, these are our values, this is what we accept, and this is our history. We're not going to just turn a blind eye. We're going to say, this happened, and now what do we do? And how do we build this community? Well, we build it with a sense of grace, with a sense of hope, a sense of being inclusive. That's the community that's part of heart-centered learning. It's really critical. Another part, and I'll just end with this, is courage. And courage we do not speak about often enough in education. It's one of those things that's so critical. You can think about a kid who's being bullied, right? Now, if the other students know something about courage, they'll stand up. They will stand with that student. But if they don't have the courage or the confidence, we have like 5 C's with Heart Center: courage and confidence are two of them. They may not be supporting. So what can you do? You help to build skills. Confidence is success. We want kids to feel successful. Courage is courage to know yourself, to look at yourself, to say, hey, I'm working at it, right? And courage to speak up when things are wrong. Say, hey, it can be different. We need courage. It's so important to the future of this planet. So all the things we're talking about, yeah, they work really well in early childhood. But as Orinthia said, it extends beyond the school into the community.
It's so critical. And when I think about all these complex problems, in the sense that they are really also, the media and everything really feeds into it, is that as a person, let's say, who never faced racism, for example, it is really sometimes really hard to really put yourself into someone's shoe who really face that, right? That is really hard and takes a lot of effort. What do you think holds educators especially back of not applying what you're basically writing in your book? Because what you're really, your argument of heart-centered learning is so crucial. It reminds me of the saying of the longest journey is from the mind to your heart, right? Bringing the two in alignment, right? And really feel in alignment with yourself, but with the world, right? So what do you think is it that holds still, unfortunately, educators back and causing harm to especially racialized minorities, you know?
I think what holds people back from doing this work is they're judging themselves, right? And that's why in the book it says acknowledge where you are without judgment, right? So if you are someone who has not experienced racism and you don't really understand, and sometimes it's easier to just be silent and not say anything because you don't want to feel like a bad person. But we talk about how you can get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And the first way to do that is to not judge yourself for not knowing, not judge yourself for not having the same experiences, and then becoming that ally to say what can I do, right? What can I have a friend, and she's white, and I remember when way back when Black Lives Matter first happened, I wore my shirt and everything, and she just didn't really understand it. She was just like, I just don't understand why you wear this. It's not something that I really support. She just didn't really get it. And then as unfortunately, things kept happening. And then she ended up watching the murder of George Floyd, which I've never seen because it's just not for me to watch. She called me in tears and she said, when this first started to happen, not first, but when Black Lives Matter first was, incorporated, because we know this has been happening for years and years and years. But when Black Lives Matter first started happening, she said, the circles that I run in, and the news media that I subscribe to, every Black person that lost their lives at the hands of the officer was always guilty. There was always a reason. There was always a reason. And so I didn't understand why you would promote this thing. She's like, but when I actually saw what happened to George Floyd, she was like, there was no reason. And then she said, I felt horrible because all these years and all these people that lost their lives, she's like, I really had no sympathy for them because I thought that they were not compliant. And she said, and it made me feel really bad. And I said, that's okay. Where do you go now? What do you want to do now? What can we talk about now? And I think what holds so many people back from getting in this conversation and becoming allies is they really feel bad and they don't know what to do with those feelings. And what I say is acknowledge them without judgment, because guess what? Everybody has bias. Everybody. No one is without bias. Black, white, Asian, Native, Latina, everyone has bias. It's a function of being a human. And so acknowledge your bias, acknowledge where you were off, and then make a resolution to do something different and understand that the other thing is, what if I get it wrong? Newsflash, you're going to get it wrong. But you have to be open to hear where you've gotten it wrong. Listen, I was doing a presentation and I'm talking about this subject. And I said, okay, we're going to get in our groups and we're going to powwow. Super offensive. But the young lady that was there was from, I can't remember what tribe she was from. She called me in. She didn't call me out. She didn't raise her hand in the middle of the presentation. She waited till the presentation was over. She pulled me to the side and she said, Dr. O, let me tell you why saying when you get in groups and have a powwow is offensive to me. I had no idea, and I'm doing this work. So you are going to get it wrong, and that's okay. Be willing to jump in and do the work without judging yourself. And that's what holds people back. They feel bad and they want to do everything right. You're going to feel bad, so get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you're going to mess up. So just be teachable. We want our students to be teachable, right? So we have to be teachable also. And that takes self-reflection, which we talk about in the book. It takes mindfulness. And that's where these mindfulness and these yoga practices come in, because it helps you to self-reflect, right? And then go out and do the work. And then when you mess up, because you will, because you're human, you say, okay, how can I do better, and be open. And I didn't get upset when she said that to me and like, oh my goodness, now I got to quit doing the work because I said bow wow and how could I do that? It was, I didn't know. And now I know. And now I'm not going to do that.
This is empowerment for
Yeah.
educators, for teachers, right? So that they can really make a difference and really lose this kind of fear, right? And acknowledge, it's really, I really admire and I love your passion, Dr. O. So please go ahead, Dr. Mason.
Thanks.
Okay, so what I want to add to this, and I think I'm the person to do that because I'm a Black person in the group right now, is that we know sometimes people don't change for other reasons.
Mhm.
It could be the fear of what's coming next, the uncertainty. And if you think about the concept of white privilege, people have been in a position of power. They've done things one way for a long time. They've been the ones who had the reins in their hands, and they don't know what's going to happen if they give up. In our book that's coming out this fall, which is on leadership, leadership and anti-racism, we go into this in more detail. But there are groups you can join, your experiences you can have. I was a member of Coming to the Table. It was a a group that met monthly for 3 years, where we had blacks and whites primarily, sometimes other races as well, coming together, talking about racism, what they knew, how they learned it, and where they were headed, and how they felt. And it was done without judgment. And it was really an important experience to go through. But we know that there are people who fear what's coming next and who've had that privilege, that sense of power. And I will say, basically, from the educator's standpoint, when we're working with schools, schools really need to be in the business of being inclusive, supporting all people, and supporting opportunities for all people. Workforce development, economic development, making sure that everyone has a sense of equity and fairness. And for that to happen, yes, there will be changes. And we are sometimes stepping into areas that are kind of the unknown territory. But that's okay. It's time to do it. We need to do it. And so sometimes it's, yes, people just aren't sure what to do and they need time to process. But sometimes we need courageous leaders out there who will take a stand and say, this is what needs to happen. This is what's fair and just. And this is where we're headed.
Yeah, that's so important. And it is tough. It's a change, right? And people usually are always afraid of change, right? And that's the hard thing. And I think it goes across any professional, right? Whether you're a teacher, an educator, a business leader, it just takes time. And I think that's something that we definitely struggle in so many ways. So, how do you approach this specific hard idea when it comes to working with families? Because there is so much complexity too. With on one hand you have the kid, on the other hand you have like the family, and how is the response from like the families in general?
I'll start. So, the beauty of early childhood education is that you're educating families. You're not educating individual children. And so that's a mindset that we have to get out of first. It's the whole family in early childhood, so it's not just that individual child. And I think for me, as far as families resonating with the message of empathy, equity, and anti-racism, it's really a message of belonging. The number one human need that every person has is they want to feel like they belong. And as educators, we can do that. We can make every family feel like they belong, whether we like them or not, whether we agree with how they vote or not, whether we agree with how they worship or not. How do we start? We have to start by understanding that acceptance is not agreement. And I think that's where we get off course. We feel like in order to accept this family and make this family feel like they belong in our classroom, in our school community, they have to look like us, vote like us, worship like us, lead lives like us. And that's simply not the case. Is it easier to make someone who looks like you, believes like you, votes like you, worships like you? Is it easier to make that family feel like they belong? Absolutely. Affinity is a real thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But as educators, we have a responsibility to make all of our families feel like they belong. And how do you do that? You have to go back to the HEART acronym with self education. What are these families dealing with? And how can I make these families and their traditions feel like they belong? And it's real simple as just affirming tradition, affirming family, affirming, their sense of self and identity. I went to a presentation, and a lady, she was from Mexico, and she talked about when she was in first grade, and it was her first year in the country, and they had migrated here, and they were a family of affluence. So first there was this idea that everyone that came here from Mexico was someone escaping, someone poor, blah, blah, blah. So she said we had to deal with that. That was the first thing. She said the second thing, she did a project as a first grader, and they were supposed to come in and show what they did over the summer. And she said, "Well, the summer we go back to Mexico and we have really big pig roast." And it was a big thing, and the uncles get together and they kill the pig, they clean the pig, they do all these things. So she was super excited as a first grader to come and show pictures with her families with the pig and da da da. And the teacher said, "Ew, that is just gross. Why would you do that? That's disgusting." And she said she never shared anything that her family and her culture did ever again for the rest from second grade all the way to high school, because she felt ashamed for something that as a first grader, she was so incredibly excited about. And so as educators, we have to make sure that we're doing our own due diligence, right, to make these families feel like they belong. I had an opportunity to do some training with a group of early childhood educators from Singapore. And there's a lot of religious diversity in Singapore. And people feel differently about dogs. There's some religions that are like, we don't do dogs. Dogs are not sacred. We can't be in the classroom with dogs. And then there's other religions that dogs are pets, dogs are our family. And this one childcare center, they wanted to bring in rescue dogs to teach the kids, but they understood the dynamics of everyone that was in their building. So they did not impose that program on on all their families. They sent a letter out. This is what we want to do. And they got the response. And then they said, okay, when we do this on this particular day, your children have an excused absence. They don't have to be in the building. They don't have to be there. And then the families that wanted to participate, participated. And then they asked, for religious purposes, is there a way that you would like us to clean and or disinfect the building before your students come back, because we don't want to be offensive? Something as simple as that, saying we can make all of our families belong. They didn't just shut it down and say, okay, well, we're not going to do anything with dogs ever. But they also didn't say, well, we like dogs, so deal with it. They surveyed their families. They found out what was value to them, and they made accommodations. And a lot of times it's not that hard. It just takes that effort of self-education and learning your families and making every family feel like they belong. It's real simple.
But what Orinthia is talking about in many ways is the school climate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a welcoming climate? Does are we looking at the strengths of each student, each family? Are we looking at the strengths of each culture? And how do those show up? In what visible ways do students who come from Latin America feel like they belong in a school in America, right? In the United States. What do we do so that it doesn't feel so foreign to a student from another country or culture? That's really important. And I think related to this whole concept is student agency. So again, we support families by supporting the students' choices. And a lot of that has to do with play. When you think about early childhood, we think that play is sometimes like the afterthought. If you have time, you'll get to play. Well, as we say in our book, really what it comes to is play is an opportunity, really, to help the brain. Neurons in the brain are reorganized during play. So you can strengthen learning. You can actually develop pathways for new learning through play. It's a way to generalize what's been happening during the formalized instruction, but it's also a way for children to explore, to feel the joy of learning, to feel that, yes, they are in control, which is so important. Being in control of your life, knowing that, in fact, what you want to do is accepted, is valued, and that, in fact, you have a say in your education. That is critical to our lives. And as families know that their students are supported, that their ideas are supported, they too feel better accepted.
It is so important. My question is, why is that today we think we have to agree in order to accept the family or their way of living, right? Where does this come from? What do you think? And why do you think this is so detrimental to our education and really the future of our society?
I'll start. So I think that it comes from tribalism, and it comes from just being when you're raised in a family and you have family values and you have community values and you really value those things, right? And those things mean a lot to you. And when those things are challenged, to say your perspective is your perspective, but there are other perspectives. um I think it comes from feeling like, in order to see your perspective, which is different than my perspective, it makes my perspective wrong. And that's actually errant because, there's the whole story of the four blind men that are touching an elephant, right? And they say, well, what are you touching? And they all describe the different things that they're touching, but then they start arguing because they say, no, that's not what it is. This is what it is. And really, all of their perspectives were accurate because they were seeing, they were feeling what exactly they were feeling. But your perspective doesn't mean that someone else's perspective is wrong, or it doesn't negate the validity of what you do. And so if I worship this way and vote this way, and then you come in and say, well, I don't believe in that and I don't vote that way, that somehow makes me wrong and you right. No, two things can be true. Two things can be true. And unfortunately, we're in a culture where it's no, it's only this thing. This is the only thing, this is the only way. And I think that's where that comes from, because it's like, well, if I accept your opinion, if I accept that you don't vote the way that I do, then that somehow makes you right and me wrong. And this is really not about right or wrong. It's really about pro humanity, and I think that's really where we have to start, because no matter how racist you are, no matter how hateful you are, no matter how evil you are, I have no right to dehumanize you. Because the minute I dehumanize you, it makes it easy to harm you. So, how can I, as an educator, right, come to a place where all of my students and all of my families maintain their human value in my eyes, even if the way they live, the way they vote, the way they worship doesn't agree with me. And it starts there. And we have to start there, because the minute you dehumanize someone because of difference, you make it easy to harm them. How did things like slavery happen? We say they're three-fifths of a person. How did things like the Holocaust happen? We say, oh, they're just Jewish dogs. How did things like the Trail of Tears, the Brasile Act, Japanese internment? I can go on and on and on. It starts with dehumanization, and we dehumanize because there's difference. But if we can get to the point to say, no matter how we differ, your life is still valuable, I think we can get to a place where we are a more pro human society. And I think education always leads the movements. And if we do it here, we can do it everywhere.
And what I'd like to add, if you go back to a strictly educator's perspective, thinking about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we had curriculum standards, right? No child left behind. And we said, wow, some districts, some states didn't have the same standards as others, and they were behind. And we wanted to make sure that everyone lived up to a same standard. And if we look at norm reference tests, we saw the same things, developmental tests. We had standards that people who were in power came up with. And we have educators who've been trained in that system. So now what we need to do is peel things back a bit and say, you know what? There are differences, and these differences are valuable for our sense of humanity, for our future together. And I'll just think for a minute about Indigenous people and how they have valued the land, right? And you can think about the buffalo, how they valued the species and how important that was to them, and how we basically ignored that. And we've done a lot to destroy the earth. So we need to listen to other people. We need to make sure there's room at the table and in the legislature and in our families and our communities, our schools, for people of all races, ethnicities, and cultures, and that we understand that we each bring something of value. And we help each other, we uplift each other by being part of a community.
You know, you really speak to my heart. And what I like so much in this book is you basically fill the gap between one to the other extreme, right? We always have this tendency, there are new reforms, and then people come and say, okay, well, there's no tests anymore. We can't do it's just from one extreme to the other, right? And we need somehow, like, kind of, and that's obviously, you touched on it, tribalism, obviously, when you feel like you're kind of, your white race, is under attack, so then they stick together and feel like they are losing something, and then you have like others. So this is always so hard, right? And therefore it is so pivotal to have people like you who really go and bridge the gap, between this really, really challenging time that we are going through. And so when you look back from the very onset, when you started your work, to today, do you see any tangible progress in terms of educators who truly embody this and make an impact in the classroom?
I mean, I do. I completely see. We're having the conversation. That in itself is progress because conversations are catalysts for change. So the simple fact that we are engaging in this conversation, and you're not our first podcast. We've been on other podcasts. So we are having the conversation, right? And we're drawing a different frame around our set of circumstances as educators. So there is change. It may not be as grandiose as we would like, but there is change. And we've been changing as a world and as a nation in the world of education, right? And so again, for me, that's hope. You have to start with hope, because if we don't start with, oh, we're not making any change and everything is terrible, everything is bad, then you're not going to want to engage in the work. And guess what? When you don't want to engage in the work, what do? You shrink back into your tribal cocoon, and biases always thrive in echo chambers, and you just stay there. But if you say, no, there is hope. I mean, we have this book and it's out. And it was so good that the publishers made it into two, because they're like, this needs to get out there. And we're not the only ones doing this research, so that there is hope, that we are moving away from working with standards that often identify the powers that be's agenda. And we're moving away from that, and we're recognizing the inherent value that every human being and every culture carries. And we're saying, and Howard Gardner said it a long time ago, multiple intelligences. But I think when we were looking at multiple intelligences, we were looking at individual children. But when I look at multiple intelligences now, I'm looking at different cultures, different ways of thought, different nationalities, and there's different ways in which to get to the ultimate goal of education, which is creating a more humane person. At least that's what I feel the goal of education is. It's not about creating someone that gets, a perfect score on the SAT or gets into every college or straight A's. It's really about creating anti-racist, pro-human students that further compassion within our society. And that's what we're doing. And I think that we've been doing it. And I think that things are, in fact, getting better. That's just me.
Now, I would add to that, we have another book that I'm working on with Dr. Renee Owen out of Southern Oregon University. It's on transformative leadership, and it's very much in the heart-centered line of work. And we are quoting people from hither and yon, Canada, South America, who are working on schools that are transformative schools. There are living schools that pay attention to our planet, to what's going on this earth, to making sure that we're making dynamic changes that are responsive to the needs. We cannot live with the standards, with the educational system that was developed way back when in the industrial age, right? With Henry Ford. And no, we've got to get beyond that. What we need to do is be open to creativity,
Yes,
to compassion, to making sure that we raise and elevate leadership so that more and more people feel that they are truly leaders in their community, working with others. And we are seeing this happen. And just to give you one other example, with our Compassionate School Leadership Academy, this is the work with Yale University. We have fellows now who are participating. They are learning about being compassionate leaders. And you put the anti-racism movement together with compassionate leadership and building capacity, scaling up what we're doing. That's where we need to go, actually. We can see the pockets of excellence, but we need to keep elevating the examples that are out there and then threading things together so that more and more places catch on and they'll say, oh, we can do it too.
Yeah.
And I think transformative change always takes time, right? And I think sustainable change usually always happens incrementally, right? Because it's like when you want to lose weight, right? All of a sudden, and then you go back to like eating chips and fish, right? A month ago. So this is so powerful, and it's profound, and it's really, it takes effort. It takes a mirror as well, right? And so, but I also want to mention something that I think one of the best examples actually of the strength of multiculturalism and of different cultures coming together is really the US. When you look at what the US has produced in terms of innovations, right, as well. So there's so much, there's a lot of still challenges, of course, but I think right there, we have an example that we say that, well, if we really want to become great in areas, we need different perspective, different cultures, different points of view, and something new can emerge out of it, right? And that's how creativity basically can emerge. So yeah, it's powerful. I'm really glad. So I want to go a little bit more into your biographies, and I want to really know, can you share a particular moment that you consider a turning point in your life, for example, in your childhood, that ultimately really paved the way that you are now on, really a change maker in education and really beyond?
I'll start. It was like 1986. I'd been a professor for years, and I felt like I was not accomplishing everything I wanted to do. I felt like it was getting stale. And I'm one of these people, I don't let grass grow under my feet, okay? I tend to want to be near the cutting edge. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I attended a free class, University of Washington, and it was an alternative school. It was on the book, The Road Less Traveled by F. Scott Peck. And essentially he said, hey, there are various ways we can travel during our time on this earth. You need to pick what's right for you. And in that class were a couple of people who'd been to Sindhorn, which is a intentional community in Scotland. It was an international peace community. And at that point, I mean, this will tell you something about my life. I was a single parent. My daughter was wanting to go live with her dad. She was in high school. It was a hard time. I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, okay, I can do this. And I gave up almost everything. I stored a little furniture, a few things with my mother, sold things, gave it away, went to Scotland thinking I was going to just be part of this international peace community, meditate, do yoga, learn more about different techniques, be an artist perhaps. I was there 6 weeks. My daughter and I would get on the phone and we would cry. It was too far. I came from there back to the United States. I had a friend living close to DC, which is where I live now. And she said, okay, come on, stay with us for a while. And I did that. And then I started to work with organizations in the DC area as a researcher. And I have to say 2 or 3 things happened. One is the shift from being a professor and teaching to being a researcher was really important for my life and how I live my life and what I believe in terms of implementing change, but also the full concept of giving up everything and trusting, just trusting God, the universe, that in fact, I will get what I need. And it worked. And it's given me such a sense of courage and confidence then to go out time and time again and say, okay, what do we need to do? Let's do it.
Wow. Thank you
That's so
for
good.
sharing.
Well, I think as far as this work is concerned and becoming more anti-racist in my work, that moment, that pivot happened when I was going through my doctoral process. So I've always, and since I started college, I've always wanted to be an educator, a teacher. I've worked on efficacy, because I really believe teachers make a difference. But I really was more about curriculum, right? And instruction and academic outcomes and learning goals and all the things, right? But it wasn't until I really woke up to the experience of racism. I had experienced racism my whole life, but because I had a different frame around it, I just kind of like, oh no, no, I used to, and I shudder to say it now, but I used to think like, oh my goodness, I would love to be back in the era with Gone with the Wind and the slavery times, because there was this whole romanticization of slavery, and there was the whole whitewashing of history, the history of Black people. So it wasn't that bad. And it wasn't, and so when I experienced things like racism, like I dated a person who was white and he lived on the other side of the tracks. And, when I dated him, people were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're dating him. They call people the N-word. And I was like, oh, it's not that bad. And then when I actually was over there one time, I was in high school, they had like a bookmobile come, and one of the ladies in the town was like, are you an exchange student? And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, what are you doing over here? Essentially. And when I told her, oh, well, this is, my boyfriend, she was like, do his parents know? Like, so, but these things that happen throughout high school and college, I didn't really see them as racism because, again, I had a different lens. But when I was told, after answering all of my questions in my oral defense for my dissertation to get my doctorate, when I was told that I wasn't going to pass, and when I asked why, and then re-answered everything correct again, they said to me, well, you just don't speak like a scholar. And that, I think in that moment, my eyes really became open, and I was able to navigate that situation, have a conversation with the dissertation chairs and things like that. And the situation worked out great. I hold no grudges to anyone, that was in that process, because we were able to have a conversation of implicit bias. And we had just had a class that said educators often, demote or demark children of color because of how they present their answers. And when I said that to them, they're like, oh my God, we just did that. And we had a great conversation. And I got my doctorate, obviously. But that was the moment where I was like, wait a minute. We there are barriers for Black and brown children that will not enable them to go to the highest levels because of bias, because of racism, because of systemic injustice. And if we don't do something about it, if I don't do something about it, then I'm a part of the problem, because my whole focus was academics, outcome, learning goals, everything that Dr. Mason mentioned. I was Mrs. Henry Ford. Like, we got to get them to learn. But there's something there that needs to be addressed before we can get to that. And that's why I love this whole social emotional learning movement. I love the heart movement. I love the mindfulness movement, because until we acknowledge that there is racism and that there is bias that can stand in, like, I wouldn't have my doctorate today if I just said, okay, and let it go. Or I wouldn't have it from this university. I would have went to another one. You see what I'm saying? So I think that that experience and being able to navigate that experience without getting upset, angry, hating everyone at the school. I tell the story all the time. And the ladies that were on the committee that did the judging, they say, please tell the story, because we needed to be called out or called in. And we need, like, implicit bias was at work and we didn't even see it, but you let us see it. And so I think that was pivotal for me in this work, because it's so important, because you can't get to those academic learning goals and outcomes if you don't address the elephant in the room. And it's that systemic racism, bias, prevents students of color, BIPOC, Indigenous, and students of color from achieving experiences that will propel them into whatever their passion is.
It's unbelievable, it's, I mean, I hear this the very first time. Like, it's crazy actually to think about it, but it's always, and I think Einstein said it, if you are able to actually explain it to a one grader, then you really understood it yourself, right? And I really admire people like you too, who are really able to explain yourself in very simple language, because that really tells me that you really understand what you're talking about, right? Because what I see also in academia is a lot of people hide behind these kind of fancy words, and and kind of to fit in, right? It sounds very smart and so on. So, and it's very, very unfortunate. So thank you for sharing this. And luckily you also have somehow this gift, this god-given gift, I always want to say, that you were able to actually stand up and say, hey, okay, give me the reason why, and you sorted it out, right? Because it's very likely that many people happen that because they just felt like, well, I trust the committee, right? And that's just unbelievable. I can't really believe it. And just thank you to Dr. Mason also to share it, because you really manifest what you actually are also writing about, right? Having truly living this gut feeling, and going, following your heart, and then also make it take turns and just return back and just look back and say, well, this was actually one of my most important decisions I ever made, right? So it really speaks
Yeah.
of your heart and your whole philosophy that you're teaching.
Good.
Tell me a little bit more about your role models and influences that you had, if there was one specific role model that really helped you to become the person that you are today. And what did you do? Because for some people it's kind of hard. Okay, well, you go out and ask someone, like, become my mentor or role model. How do you do that? How did you go about it, especially for people, whether young, elder people, everyone should have a role model and should find someone that they can actually somehow be mentored. How did you go about?
Well, Jill says she's still learning. I'll say that too. I'm still learning. 2 years ago, we worked with the National Indian Education Association, and we did listening sessions to try to help to figure out what's going on with students. How can we help improve their lives? And I learned a lot about being an ally from them and what it meant to be kind of the background support, to listen carefully, and to let somebody else lead, which, after all these years of being a leader, it's sometimes kind of hard to step back a bit and just say, okay, what do you need from me? What can we do? And how do we work together? So I will say, A, I'm still learning. And then B, what you may not know about us is I've worked on mentorship programs a couple different times with exceptional children. For the Council for Exceptional Children, we developed a special education teacher mentoring program. When I was with the National Association of Elementary School Principals, we had a principal mentoring program that we helped to revamp and revise during that time. And then if you look at the board for the Center for Educational Improvement, and our current president, actually, Dr. Missy Patchke, was a mentor, a principal mentor. And then Nancy Burke, Dr. Burke, another principal mentor. So I've learned a lot about mentoring, but then what we did at CEI is we brought on, and we still bring on, between 5 to 10 to 12 interns or research assistant each year, and we work on mentoring them. We have guidelines, and we focus on what do we give to people as they work with us, because we want to help build the leadership. So I think mentoring is part of my DNA at this point. And when I go back and think about way back when, like, what was it? I'll have to say my dad, a compassionate human being who cared a lot about inclusiveness and what can we do to help support others. And then you go beyond that, and this is where I start to find people who have their flaws. And I know as a woman, and Orinthia may find the same thing but different probably, who are the women role models?
Old.
Is it Indira Gandhi? Who are the strong women leaders? Madame Curie. I mean, I had to search and search, and none of them got enough publicity. It wasn't easy to follow them. And so then you go to males, you say, Dr. Martin Luther King. For years, people say, who do you want to have dinner with? And I would always say, it's Dr. King. That's where I was. But it was never quite the right fit.
Mhm.
So I would say I'm still learning.
That's good. And I think
Beautiful.
one thing we need to just say, mentorship is not about duplication, right? You're not trying to become your mentors, but you're just using them as a focal point to help summon what their nature is, what their philosophy is, to shape your own. So again, when you're looking for mentors, a lot of our mentors are not alive, but they've left, their knowledge in books for us to read, for us to glean from what they're doing. And so that's the power of the written word, is that it will live on long after we're gone. And so I'm hoping that we can be mentors in the future, through our works, through our books. And again, a lot of what we do has been influenced by some of the people that Dr. Mason mentioned. But me personally, it's really my mother, my grandmother. We opened the book with a story of my mother and how she handled racism and a racist incident with a young child, a young 3-year-old, in the book, and how she was able to handle that in a pro-human way and really change that little girl's attitude from day one to the end of the school year. And just watching her teach and educate has been influential to me. And then my grandmother specifically, because she just had this pro-human way about her, which I think was seeped in her faith in Christ. She just had this way of just welcoming everyone. And it didn't matter what that person was going through. It didn't matter if that person was like what we would consider the town outcast. They were welcomed and they were fed and they were given whatever they needed. And so for me, just trying to glean from my mother, my grandmother, and all the mentors that Dr. Mason mentioned. And then as far as this work is concerned, and in my journey, I think Dr. Mason has been probably the biggest mentor for me. And I'm fortunate because I know other people in this journey that have started out under, big name people like Dr. Mason. And then when they come into their own and they look to that mentor for help, that mentor kind of goes, "Oh, well, you're getting too big for your britches and I'm not going to help you." And when I started my company, STEM Early, she was the one who came to me and said, "You absolutely need to start your own company." She actually gave me my first client that was a CEI client. She was like, "Not only are you going to start it, but I'm going to give you the clientele from DC because you work with them." And when I tell people there's that story, they're like, wait, what? She did what? Because who does that? But I think that's what a good mentor does. A good mentor will help you to get yourself out there so that you can establish your own thought leadership. So you're not just always subservient and under. And so now it's a little weird because it's like now we're like colleagues and stuff. When we started, I always felt like I was under her, but she does such a really great job for not just me, but everyone that she mentors of no, your research matters, your thought process matters, even bringing me on with this book. I mean, I feel like when it comes to this book, I feel like I'm the least of these. Like when you run the resume of the other three authors, I'm like, okay, well, how did I get on this project? But she's really good about recognizing the greatness in others and in me and drawing that out. So if you don't have a mentor that can draw out your own greatness to where your mentor now sees you as an academic equal, then that's really not a mentor. And so I'm also learning from her as I have people now that are working for me that I can do that for them and say, no, you need to do this. And bring them in on projects. And so I appreciate her and just these 10 years of working with her because like I said, when I applied, when I found her online and I found the company online, all I wanted to be is an intern. And she saw my resume and said, no, 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 no. You have potential to be so much more. And I just appreciate, that. And I appreciate her. And I hope that everyone in the field of academia can find someone that will recognize their greatness and help them bring it out. Because I definitely wouldn't be where I am without her, period. Full stop.
Look at you now. Look at her. Wow. Yeah.
Appreciate
Her.
I appreciate it.
I think Dr. Mason, you read too much Gandhi, and that's why you truly became the change that you want to see in the world, and that's so beautiful. And the same with you, Dr. Ho. So really, it's a truly a blessing to see how you both found each other and just continue to collaborate and work together and really make a change because we really need those positive and game changers in our profession and really beyond, because this book is really not just for elementary. You can really ultimately scale this in in high school and to even corporate companies. It doesn't really matter, you just adjust it. It's so powerful. Share
Well, I want to
the
thank you for your questions tonight. I'm looking at the time and thinking, wow, you've asked a lot of insightful questions. You've given us, time to think through things and to kind of share together. And that sense of community is just so critical. And podcasts, formats like what you have, is so critical to promote what we need right now, which is more unity, more
Yes.
sharing, and more openness. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
lastly, what makes you feel alive?
That's a good question. So my faith makes me feel alive. Um, because there is something that I'm striving for, that I'm striving to please, that's bigger than me. And so that makes me feel like I have purpose, that I've been put here and placed here for such a time as this, and that my existence matters beyond time, but into eternity. And so that really makes me feel alive.
Thank you.
My answer is similar. I get up most mornings at about 5 o'clock, and I have half hour, 45 minutes, an hour of meditation, yoga, and really going in. So I'm living those principles, and also praying, meditating for the world during that time. So building my own strength, my resilience, and my ability to go out there and do what needs to be done. It's not all easy. As you know, there can be some really tough times we go through. And what do we do to uplift others, to be the person of courage? I think it does take some inner work. So that makes me alive, but also the sense of community. I'm part of a soul group within my church, and we meet monthly and we share what's going on. And it's so critical to be able to have a place where you can just focus on soul, on higher purpose, without all the other noise. There's so much noise. And so the sense of being alive comes from relationships, but also comes from the sense of adventure, travel, cooking, creativity, anything where you feel like, wow, here's a new taste, right? A new person, a new culture. All of that is so important.
Dr. Mason and Dr. Oh, thank you so much for truly be a blessing to me and the world. And now I want everyone encouraged to buy Little Learners Big Hearts and go on solutiontree.com and get a copy, because it will truly change your life. Dr. Mason and Dr. O. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.